People like fussing over their lawn, but there are a lot of lawn myths that you should know. In this video, I'm going to cover 10 lawn myths, and they're taken from my book, Garden Myths Book 2. That's the blue one. I'm going to go over them fairly quickly, just summarize the information, and if you want the full details, you can get it out of my book. And I'll put a link to that book in the description below. Myth number 172. Lawn rollers should be used to flatten out those uneven spots in your lawn. That's a really bad idea. Perfect soil is 25% air and 25% water. And that air and water is in the spaces between the soil particles. When we put a roller on top of that lawn, we squeeze it down, we compact the soil, we squeeze those particles closer together, reducing the air spaces, reducing the amount of air, and the amount of water that's available to your plants. In fact, on a lawn, you want to do the opposite. You want to aerate it. You don't want to compact it. The lawn roller does have its place. When you're putting in a new lawn and you put down some good fresh soil, it's a good idea to roll that a bit. That gives a better seed bed. You'll make better contact with that seed. It's also a good idea if you're laying sod. Lay the sod down and then roll it once, just to make sure there's a good contact between the sod and the soil. In either case, whether you've seeded or laid sod, use it only once, and then get rid of the lawn roller for good. Myth number 173. Lawn should get 1 inch of water every week. By the way, the numbers here refer to the myths in my book, and I've numbered them so that book 1 and book 2 use different numbers. That way you'll know which book has a description for the myth. Back to watering your lawn. This 1 inch rule, first of all, doesn't make any sense because people in the north where it's cooler, they need to water a different amount than people in the south where it's hot. If you live in a very humid climate, you also need to water less. So the 1 inch rule is always wrong. The second reason it's wrong is that you really need to know the kind of grass you have and when it grows. So we have two general types. We have cool growing grass and warm growing grass. In the north, we tend to use the cool growing grass, and it tends to grow when the temperature is cool. That's why it's called cool growing grass. So it grows early spring and in the fall. And in the summer, it goes dormant. When you're watering, you want to match the watering to when it's growing. So we water in the spring, and we water in the fall, if necessary. And in summer, we just let it go dormant. Warm growing grass, on the other hand, grows when it's warm. So it's dormant in spring and fall and tends to grow more during the summer. So it needs to be watered when it's actually growing. And since it's growing in the hot temperatures, you probably have to water more than 1 inch a week. Don't follow rules in gardening. Learn to understand the plant, learn to look at it, and then do what's appropriate for the plant. Rules like 1 inch of water a week is done for those people who can't be bothered to learn how to garden. It's better than nothing. But if you want to be a real gardener, learn to look at your plant. Myth number 174. Put clover in your lawn and it will feed the lawn with nitrogen. There is a bit of truth here, but mostly this is a myth. Clover is a legume, and legumes have nodules on their roots. These nodules hold a bacteria called rhizobium, and those bacteria are able to take the nitrogen in the air and convert it to nitrite. And it hands that nitrite over to the plant root, which then converts it to nitrate and uses it. There's this common sense that clover is making all this nitrogen and pumping it into the soil, and all the plants around the clover are able to use it. And that's not what happens. Legumes do get nitrogen from the air, but they keep it. Nitrogen's too valuable to just squirt out into the soil. So the clover holds on to it. It doesn't hand it over to the grass root. Now, if you mow and you cut some of the clover leaves off and you let that sit on the lawn, that will decay and release some nitrogen for the grass. However, if you come and rake your lawn and take that away, that clover is adding no nitrogen to your lawn. Add cornmeal to the lawn and it will control weeds. Well, that's complete nonsense. The problem here is that people are mixing up two products. One is cornmeal. That's the stuff you get from the grocery store. And the other one is corn gluten meal. You get that from the nursery. Two products. They're not the same thing. Cornmeal from the grocery store is just an organic material. If you spread that on your lawn, It will decompose just like every other organic material, and it will feed the weeds. It does nothing to stop weed growth. Now, corn gluten meal can have effect on weeds, but it doesn't affect weeds that are already growing. It's not a herbicide. Corn gluten meal will prevent seedlings from growing. Now, there are a couple other myths around this that you should be aware of. Some people think that the corn gluten meal dries out the roots of these seedlings, and that's how it kills it. That's not true. Some people think that corn gluten meal prevents seeds from germinating. That's also not true. When you use this product, the weed seeds in your lawn will still germinate. But when they're very tiny seeds, the corn gluten meal becomes toxic to that seedling and kills it. Now, does this work? It does work, but there are a couple problems here. First of all, corn gluten meal has become really expensive. The second problem is it has a pretty high nitrogen content. It's 10% nitrogen. So if you don't apply it at the right time or the right way, all it does is make other weeds, the existing weeds, grow better. It's a fertilizer. So it's really important to apply it just when those seedlings start to grow. Timing's important. The amount of material you put out is important. And you have to water it in. Follow the instructions very closely and it can work, but it's not a real good option. Myth 178, thatch in your lawn should be removed. I mean, it's become common practice, at least here in the north. We suddenly get this nice warm spring day and everybody wants to rush into the garden and do something. The beds are still dormant, but the grass is starting to green up. So we go on the grass and we remove thatch. People out there with their rakes getting rid of all that thatch. Well, you're probably doing more harm to your lawn than good. First of all, it is normal for grass to have thatch. A little bit. A ½ inch of thatch is good for the lawn. It shades the roots, keeps them cooler, reduces evaporation, leaves more moisture in the soil. Lawn grass should have some thatch. Raking out every last bit only damages the roots. Doesn't do any good for the plant. Now, if the thatch layer gets too thick, then it prevents water from getting into the soil, and it's a good idea to reduce that. The best time to do that is later on in spring, once the grass is growing really well. You don't want to do it right away. You also don't want to walk on your grass earlier in the season because you're compacting that soil. Stay off the lawn early spring. The best time to fertilize your lawn is in spring. Well, that may or may not be true. It kind of depends on your grass. What we want to do is we want to fertilize the lawn when it's growing really well. So if you have cool growing grass, it starts to grow in the spring. And so a mid-spring fertilizing is a good idea. That's when it's growing. But we don't want to give it a real high amount of fertilizer because what that does is grows lots of leaves. You get this nice green grass, but the roots aren't growing. In cool growing grass, the roots grow more in fall. So late summer, in zone 5, that's like late August, early September, is a good time to fertilize. The grass starts growing again, but it's growing both leaves and roots. And we have several months of temperatures that are warm enough for this grass to grow well. Now, fertilizing late fall doesn't make any sense. And this was another thing people were doing. They were putting fertilizer on just before the snow comes to help it get through the winter. That's a waste of money. Grass is not growing in winter, it goes dormant. Now in warm season grass, you have to do this a little differently. It doesn't grow when it's cool, so there's no point in fertilizing early spring. You want to wait until that grass is actively growing and making good leaves and then fertilize. And when you fertilize lawns, always take the yearly amount of fertilizer and split it into 2 or 3 parts. A little bit several times a year is much better than a whole bunch at once. Myth 180, you should add lime to your lawn to get rid of the moss. Now the logic here goes something like this. Moss likes acidic soil. Our soil's too acidic, so we've got a lot of moss growing. If we lime that soil, it will raise the pH. It will be less acidic, and the moss will die out. That's false. First of all, there are many kinds of moss, and that grows in acidic soil and in alkaline soil. Part of my lawn is wet, shady, and full of moss, and my pH is 7.4. I also have a limestone rock out back that's almost as big as me, and it's covered in moss. Limestone is extremely alkaline. Moss will grow no matter what the pH is. Now, liming your soil might make sense if you have very acidic soil, but unless you have that, don't use lime on your lawn. You can also buy a product called a moss killer, and it's designed to kill that moss, and the advertising will tell you it will get rid of moss in your lawn, but that's not true. It's important that you learn why you have the problem. Why do you have moss in a lawn? Well, moss grows where other things don't. Your problem is not the moss, it's the fact that your lawn isn't growing properly. So work on making the lawn grow better. Fertilize it more. If it's in a wet area, try to drain it. If it's shady, overseed it with some lawn grass that likes the shade. Fix your lawn problem and make it grow better, and the moss will disappear. It's the only way to solve this problem. Myth 181. Cut your lawn short so it doesn't grow so much. Well, in some ways this is true. If you cut your lawn very short, the lawn has no leaves. It can't photosynthesize. It can't make food, so it doesn't grow very well, and it becomes an unhealthy lawn. But that's not really good for you. You're much better off leaving the grass grow taller, cut it longer, and let it grow. You'll have a healthier lawn. So I hope you've enjoyed these 10 lawn myths. I've written about a lot of other gardening myths, and you can get to those a couple different ways. You can get a hold of one of my books. I have 2 of these, Garden Myths Book 1 and Book 2, or you can have a look at this video right here. Happy gardening.